The sun had just begun to set over the grand palace, casting long shadows across the beautiful gardens. Inside, however, the mood was far from peaceful. King Charles, who had ruled the kingdom with a firm hand for many years, found himself facing a dilemma that threatened to shake the very foundations of his reign. It all began with rumors. Whispers had been circulating among the court, carried from one noble to the next, about a member of the royal guard. The guard in question was a man named Sir Edmund, a trusted soldier who had served the crown for over 2 decades. His loyalty had always been unquestionable, and his reputation as a brave and honorable warrior was known throughout the kingdom. Yet there were strange stories about his recent actions, ones that raised doubts in the minds of those around him. The first signs of trouble came when Sir Edmund was seen in the company of a foreign diplomat, a man who had been quietly working in the kingdom on behalf of a rival nation. The diplomat was charming and persuasive, and it wasn't long before rumors started to spread that Sir Edmund was helping him, perhaps in ways that were not in the kingdom's best interests. Some even suggested that Sir Edmund might be involved in a secret plot to undermine King Charles's authority. As the rumors continued to grow, they reached the ears of the king himself. King Charles was not a man to take rumors lightly, especially when it involved something as serious as betrayal. He had built his reign on strength and trust, and the idea that one of his most trusted men might be involved in treachery was a bitter pill to swallow. The whispers were enough to send a chill down his spine, and soon he found himself grappling with a decision he never thought he would have to make. The king's advisors, those who had always been by his side, urged him to act swiftly. "You cannot let this man, this traitor, go unpunished," one of them insisted. "If there is even the smallest chance that he is working against you, he must be removed from the royal guard at once." Their words were sharp, filled with the kind of urgency that came from a deep-seated fear of disloyalty. But King Charles wasn't so quick to jump to conclusions. He knew the consequences of making rash decisions. He had seen other rulers falter when they let fear cloud their judgment, and he wasn't about to make the same mistake. Despite the pressure from his advisors, he decided to investigate further before taking any drastic action. The last thing he wanted was to condemn an innocent man based on nothing but rumors. Days passed, and the king continued to watch Sir Edmund from afar, quietly observing his actions. The guard went about his duties as usual, leading his fellow soldiers with the same discipline and commitment he had shown for years. But the rumors still lingered in the back of the king's mind. Every time Sir Edmund was seen with the foreign diplomat, the king's heart would sink a little further. Finally, after much deliberation, King Charles gave the order to bring Sir Edmund before him. The decision was made, and the royal guard was instructed to arrest Sir Edmund immediately. The king's heart was heavy with uncertainty. He had trusted this man for so long, and yet now here he was, about to confront him with accusations that seemed almost too serious to believe. As Sir Edmund was escorted to the king's chambers, the air in the palace seemed to grow still. There was an eerie silence as the guards marched down the long hallways, their footsteps echoing off the cold stone floors. The other courtiers and servants who happened to be nearby watched in confusion, their faces a mixture of shock and curiosity. No one could believe what was happening. Sir Edmund, the brave and honorable knight who had spent years protecting the crown, was now being treated like a criminal. It was hard to imagine that the rumors could be true, but in the court of King Charles, appearances were often deceiving. When Sir Edmund finally arrived in the king's chambers, he stood tall, his posture as straight and proud as ever. His eyes, though, betrayed a hint of confusion. He had no idea why he was being summoned in such a way. He had served the king loyally for so many years, and now to be accused of betrayal seemed impossible to him. King Charles sat at the head of the room, his regal presence filling the space. His face was hard to read, but there was a faint trace of sadness in his eyes. He had hoped this day would never come, but now, here he was, forced to face a reality he couldn't ignore. Sir Edmund was placed before him, and the king motioned for him to speak. "Sir Edmund," the king began, his voice steady but with a hint of frustration, "you have served me faithfully for many years, and yet I find myself with no choice but to question your loyalty. There are rumors, troubling rumors, that suggest you have been involved in actions that are not in the best interest of this kingdom. What do you have to say for yourself?" The room was silent. Sir Edmund's face remained calm, but his mind raced. He had heard the rumors, of course, but he had never thought they would reach the king's ears. He knew he had to be careful with his words, for one wrong move could end everything. With a deep breath, he spoke. "Your Majesty, I swear to you I have not betrayed you. I have always been loyal to the crown. The rumors you've heard are lies, fabricated by those who seek to harm this kingdom. Yes, I have been in contact with the foreign diplomat, but only because I was tasked with negotiating a peaceful resolution to a potential conflict. My actions were done with the best interests of this kingdom in mind." The king's eyes narrowed. He listened carefully, weighing every word. Could it be true? Could Sir Edmund, the very man he had trusted for so long, be innocent? Or was this just another elaborate story to cover up a deeper betrayal? The uncertainty gnawed at him. The tension in the room grew thick as the king remained silent, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on making decisions with certainty. But now, faced with Sir Edmund's calm demeanor and his insistence on innocence, King Charles felt a sense of doubt creeping in. Was this man truly guilty of treason? Or was he the victim of a plot that ran deeper than he could see? The decision was not easy. King Charles knew that this was a defining moment, one that could shape the future of his reign. He could not afford to make a mistake. As Sir Edmund stood there waiting for the king's judgment, a thought flashed through the monarch's mind. What if the rumors were only the beginning of something much larger? Something that could threaten not just Sir Edmund's life, but the very foundation of his rule. And so, in the quiet of the king's chambers, with the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders, King Charles made a choice. The only thing he could do was to continue his investigation before taking any further steps. But even as he issued the order for Sir Edmund's temporary release, the king couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The palace buzzed with a strange mix of confusion and suspicion. Word had already spread that Sir Edmund, the trusted member of the royal guard, was now under investigation. The initial shock of the king's decision had turned into whispers and curious glances among the courtiers and servants. In the grand halls, people gathered in small groups, exchanging theories and gossip, trying to make sense of what was happening. Some could hardly believe it. Sir Edmund was a man who had been with the king through thick and thin. He had fought bravely in wars, protected the crown in times of danger, and had earned the respect of everyone around him. To think that this man, this symbol of loyalty, could be accused of disloyalty was difficult to accept. Others, however, were more inclined to believe the rumors. In a world of intrigue and political games, nothing was truly as it seemed. If Sir Edmund had been caught up in something dark, the court would have to deal with it swiftly before it spread any further. As the days passed, the tension in the palace grew heavier. King Charles had ordered Sir Edmund's temporary release, but the investigation was far from over. The king needed answers, and he knew that time was running out. His advisors had been urging him to take immediate action, to lock up the guard and make an example of him. If Sir Edmund was guilty, they believed, it would send a strong message to anyone else who might be planning similar betrayals. But the king, despite the pressure, was determined not to act hastily. He had to find out the truth, and for that he needed to know who was behind the rumors. Was there someone working against him? Someone who wanted to see the kingdom fall apart? The thought sent a cold shiver down his spine. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. Sir Edmund's actions, as strange as they were, might have been part of something much bigger. While King Charles wrestled with his thoughts, Sir Edmund, now free to return to his duties, found himself in an awkward position. He had been granted a temporary release, but the shadow of suspicion still loomed over him. Everywhere he went, he could feel the eyes of the other guards, the courtiers, and even the servants on him. They had all heard the rumors, and many were beginning to treat him differently. The warmth of his past relationships seemed to have turned cold. Those who had once called him a friend now kept their distance, unsure of where his loyalty truly lay. Sir Edmund's pride was wounded. He had spent years building a reputation as one of the most loyal members of the royal guard. The accusation of betrayal stung, especially when he knew deep down that he had done nothing wrong. He had only followed orders that he believed were in the best interest of the kingdom. He had tried to explain this to the king, but would the king believe him? Would the court ever trust him again? He spent the days in solitude, trying to piece together the events that had led him to this point. His meetings with the foreign diplomat were not as sinister as people believed. They had been part of an effort to prevent a conflict between two nations, one that could have torn the kingdom apart. Sir Edmund had been sent by the king himself, though he had never been told the full details of the situation. Perhaps that was the problem. He had only been given a small part of the puzzle, and now, without the complete picture, the truth was slipping further and further away. Meanwhile, King Charles continued to probe the matter with the help of his most trusted advisors. They gathered information, cross-checked facts, and tried to understand the political landscape in which Sir Edmund had been operating. One thing became clear. The foreign diplomat that Sir Edmund had been seen with wasn't just anyone. He was a man with deep connections to a rival kingdom, a kingdom that had been eyeing the throne of King Charles for years. The king's suspicion grew. Could it be possible that Sir Edmund had been tricked by this diplomat? Had he unknowingly become a pawn in a much larger game? King Charles had his doubts, but he also knew that any decision made in haste could be disastrous. He had to be careful. If Sir Edmund had been set up, the real enemy was still out there, waiting for the right moment to strike. Despite the heavy burden on his shoulders, the king knew that he couldn't afford to wait too long. The rumors were spreading fast, and if nothing was done soon, it would be impossible to contain the damage. He needed to act before the kingdom was thrown into chaos. That night, as the king lay in his chamber unable to sleep, he found himself thinking back to the earlier days of his reign. The trust he had placed in his advisors, his guards, and even his allies had once seemed unshakable. But now, with betrayal possibly lurking around every corner, that trust felt fragile. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier, and the truth seemed more elusive than ever. In the early morning hours, King Charles summoned Sir Edmund once again. The royal guard was brought to the palace gates, and he was escorted into the king's private chamber. This time there was no grand ceremony, no crowds of courtiers watching from the sidelines. It was just the king and his most trusted guard, face to face in the quiet of the early dawn. The king studied Sir Edmund closely. His expression was serious, his mind focused on the task ahead. "I've been thinking," King Charles said, his voice soft but firm. "The accusations against you are troubling, but I cannot make a decision without knowing the full truth. I want you to tell me everything, Sir Edmund. Everything you know about your dealings with the diplomat, and what you were trying to accomplish. You have my ear, now tell me your side of the story." Sir Edmund nodded, grateful for the king's willingness to listen. He knew this might be his only chance to explain himself fully, and he wasn't going to waste it. He took a deep breath and began to speak, laying out the details of the meetings with the diplomat and the secret negotiations that had taken place. He explained how he had been sent by the king's advisors to prevent a war that could have torn the kingdom apart. The more Sir Edmund spoke, the clearer it became that he had not been working against the king but had been part of a larger, more complex plan. He had simply been left in the dark about many aspects of it. The king listened intently, his expression never changing, but his mind was racing. The more Sir Edmund spoke, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. It seemed that the royal guard had been caught up in something much larger than anyone had imagined. Sir Edmund wasn't the traitor. He was a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. The king sat back, deep in thought. He had been quick to judge, quick to order the arrest, but now he saw that he had been wrong. The situation was far more complicated than a simple case of disloyalty. Sir Edmund had acted with good intentions, and the blame, if there was any, lay with those who had manipulated him. "I see," King Charles said at last, his voice quieter than before. "I believe you, Sir Edmund. You acted out of loyalty, not treason. I will clear your name, but we must get to the bottom of this. Someone is behind this plot, and they must be stopped before it goes any further." For the first time in days, Sir Edmund felt a weight lift from his chest. The king had believed him. The truth was finally being heard, and the shadow of suspicion was beginning to fade. But as the king had said, the true enemy was still out there, and the fight was far from over. King Charles sat in his private chamber, deep in thought as he pondered the truth that had finally been revealed. The weight of the decision that lay before him was heavier than ever. Sir Edmund, the loyal guard who had been accused of treason, had spoken his side of the story. The king now understood that his trusted guard had been acting in good faith, trying to prevent a war he had not fully understood. Sir Edmund had not betrayed him. Instead, he had been caught up in a much bigger plot, one that threatened the stability of the entire kingdom. Yet the king knew this was not the end of the matter. The diplomat Sir Edmund had met with was not just a mere foreign envoy. He was a figure with deep connections to a rival kingdom, one that had long sought to weaken King Charles's rule. The diplomat's actions were no accident, and it was clear that Sir Edmund had been manipulated in ways he hadn't realized. But someone was behind all of this, a person or a group working in the shadows to destabilize the kingdom. As the king turned over these thoughts in his mind, he called for his most trusted advisor, Lord Thomas, to join him. Lord Thomas had been by the king's side for years, and his loyalty was unquestionable. He had helped the king navigate many difficult situations before, and Charles needed his counsel now more than ever. "Your Majesty," Lord Thomas said as he entered the chamber, bowing respectfully, "you asked for me?" "Yes, Thomas," King Charles replied, looking up. "I need you to take charge of this investigation. The situation with Sir Edmund has taken an unexpected turn, and it is clear now that there are forces at play much larger than we initially thought. I want you to find out who is behind this. Someone is trying to weaken this kingdom, and we cannot afford to be caught off guard any longer." Lord Thomas nodded, his face grim. "Of course, Your Majesty. I will begin immediately. But I must ask, what do you intend to do with Sir Edmund?" The king paused, his fingers lightly tapping on the armrest of his chair. "He is not the enemy. I believe him. But I must make sure he is not used as a pawn in a larger game. For now, he will remain in the palace under watch. We need to uncover the full scope of what's been happening before we take any further steps." Lord Thomas bowed again. "Understood, Your Majesty. I will make sure this matter is handled with the utmost care." As Lord Thomas left to begin his work, King Charles felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in days, he believed that the truth would come to light. The investigation had only just begun, but the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. He could only hope that they wouldn't be too late. The days that followed were filled with tension and uncertainty. Lord Thomas worked tirelessly, following every lead and investigating every possible connection to the foreign diplomat who had become the focus of the investigation. Meanwhile, Sir Edmund remained in the palace awaiting further instructions. He had been granted some measure of freedom, but the shadow of suspicion still followed him wherever he went. Although the king had placed his trust in Sir Edmund, the atmosphere in the palace had changed. Courtiers and guards alike no longer treated the once revered knight with the same respect. Some even whispered behind his back, questioning his loyalty, unsure whether the king had made the right decision. Sir Edmund could feel their eyes on him wherever he went. It was a constant reminder of the price he had paid for being caught up in a situation beyond his control. But Sir Edmund did not allow himself to be consumed by the weight of the court's judgment. He had already suffered the humiliation of being accused of treason, and he refused to let that define him. Instead, he focused on what mattered most, the truth. He had done nothing wrong, and he would do everything in his power to help the king uncover the forces behind the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed his reputation. One evening, as Sir Edmund walked through the palace gardens, lost in thought, a figure approached him from the shadows. The man was tall and dressed in a cloak that concealed his identity, but there was something familiar about his movements. Sir Edmund tensed but did not reach for his sword. Something about this encounter felt different from the usual palace intrigue. "Sir Edmund," the figure said, his voice low and cautious. Sir Edmund froze, his hand instinctively moving towards his belt. "Who goes there?" "It's me," the figure replied. "I need to speak with you in private." Sir Edmund studied the man for a moment, trying to determine whether he was friend or foe. His instincts told him that this was not someone to fear, but he was wary nonetheless. "Speak quickly," Sir Edmund said, his voice steady. The man stepped forward, pulling back his cloak to reveal a face Sir Edmund recognized immediately. It was Marcus, one of his former comrades in the royal guard. The two men had fought side by side during the early years of the king's reign. Marcus had disappeared from the palace months ago, and his sudden reappearance now raised more questions than answers. "Marcus," Sir Edmund said in disbelief, "where have you been? What's going on?" Marcus looked around to make sure they were not being watched. "There's no time to explain everything, but you need to know something important," he said urgently. "The diplomat you've been meeting with, the one who's been causing all this trouble, is not just a spy for a rival kingdom. He's part of a much larger organization, one that's been working in the shadows for years trying to bring down the throne. Sir Edmund's heart skipped a beat. He had suspected as much, but hearing the words spoken aloud made the threat feel real. What organization? Who is behind it? Marcus looked over his shoulder once more, making sure they were alone. I can't tell you everything, but I can say this. There are people close to the king who are involved. You need to stay alert. Trust no one completely, not even those who've been by your side for years. They are not who they seem. Sir Edmund's mind raced. The implications of Marcus's words were staggering. How far did this conspiracy go? Could it be possible that there were traitors in the king's inner circle, people who were supposed to protect him? I'll help you, Sir Edmund said, his voice firm. Whatever it takes, I'll help you expose them. We can't let this go on any longer. Marcus nodded, his expression grave. Be careful, Sir Edmund. The ones behind this are clever. They know how to play the game, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want. Before Sir Edmund could respond, Marcus disappeared into the shadows as quickly as he had come. Sir Edmund stood in the garden for a long moment, trying to process what he had just heard. The pieces were falling into place, but the puzzle was more complicated than he had ever imagined. The conspiracy was real, and now the stakes were higher than ever.